So let's start with this new webinar from Syncore. So this webinar will talk about FAIR and what FAIR means when we do models and simulation. Don't worry if you don't know what FAIR means. You will also learn a bit more about that in this webinar. So first of all, for those of you who are not familiar with the Spark program, the Spark program is funded by the NIH Common Fund. And the main goal is to develop therapeutic devices to improve organ function through modulation of peripheral nerve activity. This is a promising treatment option for all diseases that have to do with the autonomous nervous system, such as hypertension, gastrointestinal disorders, and much more. I'm here to represent a part of the DRC. So the DRC is the Data and Resource Center. The DRC offers infrastructure to share data and resources. It is represented here, and we are 4 teams scattered around the world. I come from the computation and simulation team, the ITIS Foundation in Switzerland, and what we build here is a platform called Spark. You'll learn a bit more about that later. And also the Spark portal, it's a resource, is a website, but not only that, where all the DRC and Spark investigator meet. So there you can find data, you can find model, and learn much more and share your findings with the whole community. So let's move on. In this webinar, you'll be able to understand what FAIR is, in particular, what are the challenges in computational modeling related to FAIR. We will see a bit more the Spark platform and how the platform itself implements FAIR practices, but not only that. And also, we will see a bit what are the metadata that are meaningful for Spark, and how Spark enables you to easily retrieve them from your computational models. So after that, you'll be really able to share computational FAIR models with, and also data analysis pipeline with everyone. So we see a bit more what is FAIR, why Spark is FAIR, and which FAIR practices we enable. We'll also see how Spark metadata are accessible through Spark, and we have some time at the end for all your doubts and comments. Also, feel free to interrupt if you have questions in the middle of the presentation as well. So FAIR. FAIR is an acronym that stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. This is a term that has been started to use quite recently. And basically, many researchers find that there are some challenges with, in general, reproducible research, especially for experimental data. There are many different aspects to consider, but also we will see that also in computational modeling is not obvious to make your models and simulation FAIR. So let me give you some example here on the right. So for example, you publish a paper that uses MATLAB as a model, so it's not enough to say I use MATLAB to make your findings reproducible. So for example, you need to say which MATLAB, which version of it, if you add some specific toolboxes, or for example, you have a data analysis pipeline and you can write in your paper the data were analyzed using Python and the NumPy library. Okay, that's already good, but then it's not really so meaningful. You need to know which Python version, for instance, or which versions of the different libraries. So for example, a good practice in this case is to have your code in a repository such as GitHub, or also some other repository in case you cannot make that public right away. But at least version control would be a nice thing to have. Or also providing what in Python word is it's called a requirements file, so that you can rebuild all your Python environment so that other people can also recreate better what you used. Here it's an example from a paper that really discuss a lot what are the FAIR principles, especially applied to software and computational modeling. I'm not going to go to the details, but we'll see some practical example that hopefully will make that more clear. So as I said, FAIR, it's in the end is about reproducible research. So we all know that reproducing experimental result is not easy, it's not the fault of anyone, it's just that there are so many variables, there are subjects involved, people involved, there are experimenters and so on. So there's a lot of effort going on now to make the data reusable, also to try to share protocols in a reproducible way, and also Spark has worked a lot on that. So, okay, experimental data has to do with biology, which has many variables, many complexities, so it's not easy to reproduce those findings. But what if we work on a computational model, so it's a machine, so it should be rather easy to make your findings reproducible. But also, if we think about a bit more, there are many also open questions in computational modeling. So what was the runtime used? So before we said the Python version, but also the operating system sometimes is not, can generate some differences or some challenges in reproducing the results. Or another question that we should ask ourselves is, does the runtime environment affect the results? So if I run with this version of the library, does it change? Hopefully it shouldn't, but these are all questions that we should also be able to answer. And also making models sustainable and preservable is not obvious. So for example, one question we can ask is, how long does the software live? So my model will still be runnable in 5 years, for instance, or what happens if someone in my lab has developed a library that we all use, but then the person leaves? Are we still able to use that library? We'll find all the dependencies and so on. So also software does not live forever, so we need to make things reusable after X years. And for example, there's been in computational science recently a challenge to try to rerun old Python models, since now, for example, Python 2 is now deprecated. So that is a very interesting example to try to rerun the relatively old things, not so long ago. But it's not only about software, but also if you have a computational model, what are the input that generated certain outputs? It's not always so trivial to keep track of that. So the idea is to be able to trace back how certain output results were generated. So which input parameter were used, and also ideally we should be able to show how different input parameters affect the results. So something we can do is, for example, what we call sensitivity analysis in computational modeling is very important, or uncertainty quantification is also a concept very linked to this one. And it's not only about our model and sharing in our publication, but when we don't follow FAIR principles, it's also difficult to collaborate. So there are many examples. I'm sure all of you have experienced that in computational modeling, that there's a piece of software that does something useful for you, but in the end it's not easy to use, it's not documented, and so on. So we end up reinventing always the wheel, so recreating things that have been already used. So that's really not good for advancing our understanding and our modeling and research. And also, still related to collaboration, people use different software, and some have favorite ones, some software are more performant for certain use cases, and sometimes we end up being develop also a bit siloed models, because all of us like each favorite software, so that also doesn't help with the collaboration. But yeah, we saw many challenges, and I like here to show you a bit what you are probably used to do when you, for example, publish a paper that has a computational model. So normally you have a statement listing the software you used together with the data, how you which version you use, if you have some code somewhere that people can rerun. So this is already good, but what we would like to show today is really a new way we are building for you, so that you can really build and share fair models and simulation. And this new way goes through the OSpark platform that we will see in a second, and the SDS, which is the Spark dataset structure. So let's have a look at OSpark and see how it is fair, but it also goes a bit beyond fair. So first of all, what is OSpark? So OSpark stands for Open Online Simulation for Spark. It is an interactive online platform that you can access at this URL. You just need to request an account to us by writing that support@ospark.io. You will find again the email at the end of this webinar. And basically what it does is enabling modularization, sharing, execution of pipelines very easy from your web browser. And it contains a lot of useful resources. So something like Jupyter Lab, if you like coding, or there are also software to do CAD modeling, 3D visualization, and so on. It's really rich, and we actively work on bringing tools that people like to use on the platform. So if you remember the graph we had before with all the collaborators, the idea is to really have all your favorite software and all the software useful for the Spark research be on Spark, so everyone can continue to use. You also have access to computing power, and this seminar actually is also not focused only on people who code. So you will see that the platform also enables as activities that don't require any coding knowledge. So let's have a look a bit on how Spark is built. So we saw that it is built around reusable model. We call them also services. And here I want to show some concrete examples of how Spark services are reusable. So reusable is part of the FAIR, as we saw before. So for example, this is the information related to a service. So it's a Jupyter Lab, so where you can do coding, you have a coding interface. So what we do is always keeping the version of this Jupyter Lab, and we have rich metadata. So also part of FAIR is not only sharing data so that they are usable, but also having metadata that describe enough your model so that it's reusable and in FAIR. So here we see human readable metadata, but also we have machine readable metadata. Here I'm not showing it. It's not very interesting for a user to see, but it's basically a standardized way of describing our services on the platform, and also the input and output that goes in and goes out from a service. If you're interested about what is behind it, it's Docker. So if you never heard about Docker, is basically a technology that enables building containers. Containers, you can imagine them as a full machine. So when we have a service, we have associated Docker containers. So it means that there we have information about the operative system. We use normally Linux-based container and all the software that is inside. So it's really, if you remember the image we had before, it's really like shipping your full machine to someone else to run your code. We also said that it's very important to trace input and output relationships. In Spark, this is an example of a pipeline we have here, and here we have an example of a service, and each service has associated input and output. Here we see them in the GUI. In this button, you can see all the input that goes inside this service. You can add constraint to this input. So if it has to be a number, an integer number, we can also have that constraint here. So when a user has input something that is not according to the constraint, we'll receive an error, and so on. And this is saved every time you run your model. So we save all the information related to the service, so basically the runtime environment, but also input and also outputs. Furthermore, here I'm focusing more on the GUI, so the web part, the web part that you access from your browser of Spark, but we also have a API and access programming interface, so you can also run your Spark pipeline through command line. For now, we have it in Python, but we are also extending it to have API in C++. And what you can imagine, what you can do, for example, is changing, instead of changing manually in the UI the input to this service, you can do that through an API. So there we can also do basically sensitivity analysis and exploring how different input affect the result. So what we were discussing before. And services themselves are interoperable modules. So before we saw only one single service, but one of the greatest thing you can do in Spark is basically building pipelines. And each of these modules, as we saw, has standardized input and output. So you can connect different modules, and a module can be very different things. Can be what we call a computational service. So here is a black box with code that runs, but you can also have full software. So for example, if you want to work with medical images, you want to do a segmentation, we have software that allows that as well. So you can imagine this block as something that your collaborator can use, and you can really bring expertise from different groups, and where they can bring their years of expertise into a single pipeline. This is something we really saw a lot by working with different Spark researchers. You can enrich your pipeline with other metadata, standardized input and outputs, as we saw, and really build integrated pipelines. And we also saw that we don't want to just make models and simulation for ourselves. What is really nice in Spark is that is really a platform that is built around collaboration. So it's very easy to share a pipeline. So for example, if you are happy with your pipeline and you want to give access to everyone in the world, you just need to make it public. It will have a unique identifier, so URL that everyone can access from anywhere in the world. More metadata, and also this is really a way to really share not a single model or single simulation, but really something bigger. Now let's see at Spark in combination with the Spark metadata, so these SDS standards. A few words about the Spark data structure. There's much more information on the Spark portal. What I want you to know is that Spark, since the beginning of the program, has developed a fair standard for sharing data and metadata with the public. There's also an associated publication, and this has been built by my colleagues from the K-Core team, one of the 4 teams that work in the DRC. So the idea here is to really promote understanding about experiments, processes, data sets, protocols, to really make everything well documented for other researchers to easily understand, but also we have in mind to develop automated tools and analytics around this metadata. So also in the design of this metadata, we also have this in mind when we design this. So basically the Spark data structure is a collection of folders and files that describe your models or your experimental results. As I said, it's all very well detailed and documenting on the Spark Help Center. So I invite you to visit that as well. And it's many files and many Excel files to fill in, but also Spark has developed a tool called Soda, where you there's basically a GUI that really helps you building all this. So the SDS started for experimental data, but now we are extending it to really capture the metadata that are important for computational models. And where did we start from? Which metadata we should include? As a basis, we follow the 10 simple rules. This is a rubric that has been developed recently by a consortium of interdisciplinary people from biomedical sciences and clinical care domain. And the idea is basically a rubric with 10 rules. And the idea is to really promote fair practices, but also invite researchers who do computational modeling to do this reflection about what is fair and how their model is reusable and so on. So it's a set of rules. We already saw that has been used in computational modeling papers. So what we want to include is basically metadata that take this 10 simple rule into account. So this is a bit how our metadata, I mean the metadata that computational models should include together with their submission with sparc, but not only. So it's also another Excel file, quite complicated to fill in. But so this is what we are bringing to the SDS. But you should not worry, you don't have to fill all of that by hand. So first consideration is that if you submit your models through sparc, we already saw that they are fair by design. So this is a platform that is recognized to fulfill fair principle. And also this is something we are really working on right now. So this extended sparc dataset structure will be available soon. So please stay tuned. As I was saying, you don't need to fill all of that information by hand. So one other nice thing you will get if you develop your models in your Spark is that you will have a graphical user interface to fill in your metadata. So here I'm showing an example of how it is easy to fill in the 10 simple rules from Spark. So our goal is that a large part, if not all, the metadata that we saw before, that is part of the SDS, will be pre-filled through Spark. So what you will need to do is just to review the files that are going to be exported via Spark and submit your model to the curation team if you work with Spark. So we are right at the end of this webinar. What we learned today is that being fair in computational modeling is challenging. It's not only when you do experimental work, but also when you do models for a number of reasons. To do reproducible computational research is not trivial, but we have the SDS in combination with the Spark that help you overcoming these challenges. So stay tuned for the next version of the SDS where we'll have our computational metadata included. Some more resources. You can read more about Spark on the Spark portal. We have documentation about the platform on how to use it. We are ourselves an open source project, so you can visit us on GitHub and contribute with code if you like. And you will find other relevant webinars on our Spark YouTube channel, not only about Spark, but also about dataset and curation, and all very much related to what you saw today. And if you like coding, we have a codathon coming up, so don't forget to sign up or to share this with all your colleagues and your enthusiasts about coding. There's still a few days to sign up. And with this, I presented what I wanted to show you. And is there some question from you?
I don't know if I'm the only participant, but I really thank you for the presentation. This is a really useful platform, and yeah, I will look more into the documentation to get to know more how to implement this into my coding routine.
Okay, thank you very much. And as I said, feel free to write, yeah, check the documentation. Actually,
I have
forgot
a quick
to write the
question.
email. So please feel free to write at support@ospark.io to request an account.
I have a
Oh,
quick question now that you're mentioning. So, if this is based on Sim for Life simulation software, isn't it, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. So, Sim for Life is part of these services, these building blocks, but that's not only that. And if
Okay.
you are interested in Sim for Life, we had in March a release of basically another version of the platform called Sim for Life Lite, Lite, where
Mhm.
you can basically you have the equivalent of the academic license for Sim for Life. So you can basically, maybe you've used that already. You can do some of your simulation and Sim for Life modeling in on the web.
Okay, that's good to know. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And you can find information about that as well on the Spark portal, or if you write to support, I can give you more information about that as well.
Brilliant. Perfect. Thank you so much for the presentation.
No problem. Thanks for you. So if there are other questions, I thank you all for attending and see you soon in the modeling booth. Bye.